It is 2:14 a.m. on a cool late summer night here in New York City, and I can't sleep. Welcome to Short Stories for Long Nights. I'm Jason. Tonight we're going to jump into a story by an author I had never heard of by the name of Phillip Jose Farmer. Mr. Farmer was born in 1918, and like a number of the authors on our podcast, he worked in the sci-fi and horror genre, and he published in a number of the sci-fi magazines of the day. He was also a 3-time Hugo Award winner, which is of course a very prestigious literary prize in the science fiction world. He's written about as an author who likes to blend sexual and religious imagery in his work. Another notable thing about this author's work is that he liked to blend characters, other fictional characters, and historical figures he would put into his stories, characters that he didn't necessarily write, including one time he wrote a book called Venus in the Half Shell in 1975, and it was written in the first person, and the first person was Kilgore Trout, who is, of course, a recurring character in a number of Kurt Vonnegut's books. And apparently, Mr. Vonnegut did give permission for the use, but later regretted it. I just thought that was interesting. And being that one of Mr. Vonnegut's stories was the first story read on our little podcast, I thought I'd give that a shout. Oh, one thing I did want to point out before we jump in, someone in this story makes a reference to Miss Grundy, and that just kind of took me out of the story for a second because I had no idea what they were talking about. Apparently that was just sort of a phrase that was in the vernacular at the time. It comes from a character in a play from the 1700s called Miss Grundy, and she was someone who was very judgmental of anyone who wasn't strictly upholding all the codes of etiquette and social norms, and would look down on anyone who stepped out of line at all. So when that comes up, that's what that turn of phrase refers to. I just thought I'd point that out ahead of time. And I believe I'm going to pour myself a vodka and tonic in honor of the end of summer. I just sort of associate that drink with summer for some reason. And I invite you, of course, to pour yourself your favorite beverage or simply sit back and enjoy The Wounded by Phillip Jose Farmer. Those Polaroid glasses they give you at the 3D movies were the cause of my downfall. When the show was over, I went into the lobby and stood there a moment while I studied my schedule. I was supposed to go to a big party given by one of the prime numbers of the 400. I didn't have an invitation, but that never bothered me. Biggest gatecrasher in the world, that's me. I heard a gasp and I looked up to see this beautiful young woman staring at me. She had forgotten to take off her 3D glasses, and that, I instantly realized, was the trouble. Somehow the polarization was just right to make me visible. Or let's say that I was always visible, but nobody recognized me. The view she got enabled her eyes to make that subtle but necessary shift and see me as I really am. I thought, I'll have to tell Mother about this. And then I walked out, fast. I ignored her calls. She even addressed me by the right name, though the accent was wrong. And I hopped into a taxi with my violin case under my arm. I told the cabbie to lose that taxi in which she was trailing me. He did. Or seemed to. As soon as I entered the penthouse, a house detective seized my arm. I pointed to the violin case under my arm. His piggish eyes rolled over it as he munched upon a sandwich he held in the other hand. He was one of the wounded, always eating to stuff the ache and the hollowness of it. "Listen, kid," he said, "aren't you sort of young to be playing in an orchestra?" "I'm older than you think," I replied. "Besides, I'm not connected with this orchestra." "Oh, a soloist, eh? A child prodigy, eh?" He was being sarcastic, as many of the wounded are. I could pass for 25 any day or night. "You might call me that," I said truthfully. One of our hostess's cute little surprises, eh?" he growled, jerking a thumb at the tall, middle-aged woman standing in the middle of a group of guests. She happened at that moment to be looking at her husband. He had a very beautiful thing backed into a corner and was talking in a very intimate manner to her. The light was just right so I could see the flash of green deep within my hostess' eyes. It was the green of a long, festering wound. Her husband was one of my casualties too, but his clothing covered the swelling of the injured spot. The girl he was talking to was pretty, but she was one of the half-dead. Before the party was over, however, she would come to life with the shock of pain. When I hit them, they would know it. I glanced around at the partygoers, many of whom exhibited the evidences of their wound like medieval beggars who hoped to win your sympathy and alms by thrusting their monstrous deformities under your nose. There was the financier, whose face-twisting tic was supposed to spring from worry over business. I alone knew that it wasn't business that caused it, that he looked to his wife for healing, and that she wouldn't give it to him. And then there was the thin-lipped woman whose wound was the worst of all, because she couldn't feel it, and would not even admit that it existed. But I could see her hurt, and the disapproving looks she gave to those who drank, who laughed loudly, who spilled cigarette ashes on the rug, who said anything not absolutely out of Miss Grundy. I could read it in the tongue she used as a file across the nerves of her husband. I wandered around a while, drinking champagne and listening to the conversation of the wounded and the unwounded. It was the same as it was in the beginning of my profession, a feverish interest in themselves on the part of the unwounded, and a feverish interest in their healers on the part of the wounded. After a while, just as I was about to open my violin case and go to work, I saw the young woman enter, the one who'd recognized me. She still had the 3D glasses. She carried them in her hand now, but she put them on to glance around the room. It was just my luck for her to be one of the invited. I tried to evade her search, but she swept triumphantly towards me, finally. She carried a large cardboard box in her arms. She halted in front of me and set the box at her feet. Certain she could identify me from now on, she then removed her glasses. She was very beautiful, healthy-looking, and with no outward signs of wounds. If it hadn't been that her eyes were so bright, I would have thought her one of the half-dead. But there was no mistaking the phosphorescent glow of the warm wound deep within her eyes. I glanced at my watch coolly and said, "What's on your mind, miss?" "I'm in love with you," she said breathlessly. I had trouble suppressing a groan. "Why?" I said, though I knew well enough. "You're the one who did it," she replied. "Did you think that recognizing you I would ever let you go?" "What do you want me to do about it?" "Marry me." "That'd be no good for you," I said. "I would never be at home. I keep all kinds of hours. Your life would be worse than that of the wife of any traveling salesman. Besides," I added, "I don't love you. Usually, that floors them. But not this one." She rocked with a punch and calmly pointed at my violin case. "You can remedy that," she said. Why in Hades should I? Do you think any sane person would deliberately hurt himself in that manner? Am I not desirable? She asked. Would I not be good to come home to? Don't you often long for someone to talk to, somebody who will get your meals and listen to your troubles? Somebody who cares. Well, of course, I'd heard those exact words 1 billion or more times before. Not that they were always directed at me. Nevertheless, there was nothing new in them. And, she repeated, am I not desirable? Yes, I said, looking at my wristwatch and getting uneasy because of the delay, but that has nothing to do with it. When my marriage was annulled, somewhere back in the 18th century, or was it the 16th, I swore by all the gods I'd never marry again. Moreover, Mother says I'm too busy. Are you a man or a mouse? She flashed. Neither, I flashed back. Besides, Mother is my employer. What would I do if she fired me? Become like one of those? I glanced contemptuously at the guests. She knew what I was thinking, for she cried, Look at me! I'm wounded, but am I like them? Am I one of the halt, the lame, the blind? Am I like that detective who swells himself into a gross human balloon because he stuffs the growing void of his hurt with food? Am I like our hostess, whose green wound caused her to drive away 2 husbands because it festered so deep she went into a delirium of unfounded imaginings about them, and then got a 3rd who fulfilled the image she'd built up of the first 2? And am I like that thin-lipped woman who deep freezes her wound because she is mortally afraid of pain? And do I behave as some of these women who throw themselves at every man who might give them temporary healing, all the while knowing deep within them that the wound will become more poisonous? Is it my fault if most of these people don't cultivate their wounds? If they grow sickly and twisted and ill-smelling plants from them instead of the lovely and colorful sweet flower that grows in mine? She seized my shoulders. Look me in the eye. Can you see what you and you alone did? Is it disgusting, gangrenous, or is it beautiful? And if it does turn poisonous, whose fault is that? Who refused to heal me? Her eloquence was overwhelming. I trembled. I wasn't affected when I overheard other wounded addressing their potential healers thus, but when I was talked to in such a manner, I shook. I remembered the early days when my first wife and I had tended each other's injuries. Sorry, I mumbled abashed before this raging yet tender mortal. I must be going. No, you don't, she said firmly. She stopped and lifted the lid from the paper box. I saw it was crammed with those 3D glasses. After I tailed you here, she said, I returned to the theater and bought 100 tickets, and with them I got these. Now, if you don't come with me where we can at least talk, I'll pass them out, and everybody will see you for what you are. And don't think for a moment that those who've suffered because of you won't tear you limb from limb and string you up from the highest chandelier. Nonsense, I mumbled. I felt suddenly shaky, and so unnerved was I that I rushed away from her and out into the hall. All I wanted to do was get into the elevator, alone and unobserved, speed away with the speed of light, halfway around the world. Do you know, I think that clever young wench had planned that very move. She knew I'd be so upset I'd forget my violin case. For as I stood, fretting before the elevator door, she stepped in the hall and called, Lover! I turned, and then I screamed, No! No! I backed away, my hands spread despairingly before me. No use. The bow she'd taken from my case strummed. The arrow struck me in the heart. Later, when I tried to explain to Mother, I found myself forced to defend myself against her contention that I wanted the mortal to wound me. My argument was weakened by my secret belief that she might be right. Mother raged, but my clever wife, these modern women, showed Mother that she and her son could not alone keep up with the expanding population. A good part of the world belonged to the half-dead, and they would continue to take it over unless we got some speed and efficiency in our work. Mother became convinced, and that is why I now have so many helpers, hired through a detective agency, and why we all now carry submachine guns in our violin cases instead of the picturesque but obsolete bow. Modern times demand modern methods. There are so many to be wounded that we just simply must use the spray gun technique. There is no more individual attention, true, but then that never really mattered. What you do with your wound is up to you. Find your own healer. I, Cupid, have found mine, and it truly pleases me. The end. I love the way Cupid is portrayed in this as like a film noir hitman who carries his bow and arrow in a case, a violin case. I think that's brilliant, and some of the phrasing and just the mood really reminded me of some of these old film noirs like Sunset Boulevard or The Sweet Smell of Success. There was this moment where in the beginning he says that she got his name right but got the accent wrong. I don't know what he's talking about, to be honest with you. If any of you know that reference, like I looked up different pronunciations of Cupid, and I don't know, I couldn't really find anything that made any sense. If anyone knows what that reference might be to, please let me know. I'd be interested to hear. And I also like to hear him talk about his mother. Of course, if he's Cupid, his mother would be the goddess Venus, and I just picture her sort of sitting in the apartment waiting for him to come home. And it reminded me of like American Gods or something, you know? These gods are living among us, and they're real, and they're still here. I found the whole thing really, really entertaining and kind of fascinating. And I don't know what you made of this, but something struck me about Cupid, our narrator. And, you know, we think about Cupid as like the little baby, and, you know, oh, you got shot by Cupid's arrow. It's like a joke almost. But in this story, you know, Cupid wounds people. He shoots an arrow at them. He pierces their skin, their outer defenses, so that they may be vulnerable and open to love. And it's impossible to receive or to give love without being vulnerable to some degree. And so, yeah, I just find it interesting that, you know, it's framed like that. Cupid causes this wound and kind of accelerates this vulnerability. And at that point, you either find someone to love you and heal you, quote unquote, heal you, make that wound better, or you ignore it. You ignore your vulnerability, you ignore your ability to love, or you deny it, or it just never goes satisfied and it begins to fester and turn into something ugly. But all Cupid did was open you up in the first place. So once you're open, you had better move forward and do something with that new awareness and ability and consciousness. This idea of the fact that you're open now, you need to do something with it and find someone to love you back, or it will go bad. Or not, as an old professor of mine used to say, or not. That's what it seems like to me. Am I onto something? Am I talking a bunch of nonsense? Let me know what you think in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Of course, you know the rules. Keep it cool, keep it kind, don't be a lump of unpleasantness. And it has just begun to rain as we wrap it up here, so I'm not going to wait for it to end, so we'll just call it atmosphere if you hear it. The last thing I wanted to leave you with was something a literary critic had said about our author. It said that Mr. Farmer had the capacity to be at once naive and sophisticated in his odd blending of theology, pornography, and adventure. May we all have something so lovely said about each of us at some point. Short Stories for Long Nights comes to you from my kitchen on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. We will be here every week with short stories from some of the world's best known and most well-loved authors, and maybe a couple you haven't heard of. If you like the show, please feel free to like and subscribe. It really does help us out. Maybe toss us a review on iTunes if you get a minute. We are so grateful to our artists and musicians who provide our show art and our theme music. Allison does our art, and the music is provided by Touque, Touque. So why not check out the links provided to some of their amazing work. All right, my friend, thanks for hanging out a little bit. Hope to see you next week. We're going to have a new story and a new cocktail. And until then, I'm going to go get some sleep.